Do you think that we really can change the world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If I didn't think that, there'd be no point in doing this.
Okay, and why? What gives you hope?
I have an experience of miracles. I don't have a blind faith. I have a consistent lifetime experience of miracles. So what I mean by that is that on the issues that I've cared about the most, on the issues where we've succeeded, where it meant the most, it's been when the surrounding circumstances, by any realistic assessment of our chances, would have told any rational person there was no point, because there was no way. Huh? So those issues that are really intractable, really difficult, we're up against the toughest obstacles, are the ones that are most satisfying to achieve. When you achieve success, it's the most amazing. But really, well, I guess my favorite example, and I wrote about this in the book I wrote about saving South Moresby, which was now Guayahanas National Park, but it was a 12-year campaign. And I wasn't on it for the full 12 years, but a lot of activists from the Queen Charlotte Islands, from Haida Gwaii, decided that the lower third of that archipelago should be protected from logging and protected from industrial development. It took them 12 years. I was involved in the last couple of years, and particularly when I got into government. And I remember there were points where we could have decided to cave in and compromise. Government could have, and the environmental movement could have, because there were offers from the BC government for less than the full third of the bottom of the archipelago, basically creating a park out of the rocks and the coastline areas and leaving the trees to the loggers. And any rational assessment of the likelihood of success with Bill Vander Zalm as Premier of British Columbia and Brian Mulroney as Prime Minister of Canada, with every tree, for instance, in Windy Bay, those trees that were 1,000 and 2,000 years old, being, just an extraordinary, from an industrial point of view, an extraordinary amount of fiber. Trees that were $10,000 a piece, sitting there under a license to a logging company. To have that set aside as a national park was a miracle. And there was one memo that I actually wrote to the Minister of Environment, who was my boss, where Parks Canada leadership was actually telling him, compromise, because there's no way that this can work. If the negotiations fall apart, the only way that you'll get a park will be if the following things happen, and it would be basically that the public of Canada would understand that it was the provincial government's fault. There'd be negotiations would restart, people would get back to the table, there'd be public support for the federal position, the Haida Nation and the environmental groups would continue to support the federal government, and none of those things could happen. And I put it together as a memo for the minister where that option was described as the miracle option, and that was the one he chose, and it's the one that happened. But you can always make a case that things are hopeless. That's a very easy case to make. If you want to really be creative, you have to look at the fact that we don't control our future. Unforeseen events intercede. And if we lay the groundwork, and if we persevere, and if we set our sights on the thing that is most important for the environment, not what makes us look good politically or what gives us an achievement in the short term that we can report to a funder on. This is a real problem in the environmental movement, is being funder driven and having to have short-term achievements that you can check off and say to the funder, we did it. Right? Long-term goals that are really hard to win are the only ones that really matter. And on those, if you don't compromise and you keep pushing, other things happen. Things that you wouldn't have foreseen. In the case of South Moresby, as an example, who would have foreseen that Brian Mulroney personally would intervene, and after negotiations had broken down between the respective environment ministers, he'd pick up the phone and convince Bill Vander Zalm over the phone that South Moresby was worth saving. Now that is not something that any realistic assessment in advance would have thought was possible. So that's why I could give you a million stories like this of setting your sights on what's really important, not compromising, creating the groundwork for other things to intervene to make it possible to succeed. And that's where I think of the situation we're in right now on the planet as being very much like a patient who goes to the doctor and at the first diagnosis of cancer, and you recognize that you're in trouble. But then there's a prescribed course of things to be done, and the only way it's a self-fulfilling prophecy is if you decide, that's it, I'm dying. But I have also great faith in the life force of creation on the planet, And I know time after time, again, like a miracle, but scientifically, there be rivers that have had no fish in them for decades. And the scientists will say, well, let's restore this river, let's stop the pollution, and in 10 or 15 years we may see fish again. And somehow there's fish there the next year. Can't quite explain it, but it happens. So the life force of the planet, that force that lets a dandelion break through a sidewalk concrete, it's extraordinarily powerful. And it's only if we're extremely arrogant about our own capabilities do we deny that if we're on the right side of creation, if we're working with those forces of nature that are constantly reaffirming and pushing for life, those forces are on our side. So we're working politically, but we've got other things happening around us that when we make space for them, create they create miracles. They create solutions and success against impossible odds. And it happens over and over and over. So that's why I'm an optimist on the issues. The prognosis is bleak, but my confidence that we'll overcome these obstacles is very strong.